I always thought betrayal would come like a lightning strike, sudden, loud, unmistakable. But the truth is, sometimes it comes disguised as laughter, wrapped in a toast, under a ceiling of glittering lights. The ballroom was bathed in gold. Candle. Flames danced in delicate glass votives. Soft music curled around conversations like smoke. My wedding dress, stitched with tiny beads, whispered against the floor as I moved, floating in a dream I had built since girlhood. I caught Jason's eye across the room. His smile was small, distracted. I told myself it was the nerves. Everything felt just a little off, a little too staged. But I clung to the dream like a child clutching a worn blanket. The clinking of a fork against a champagne flute cut through the room, calling for attention. Karen, my stepmother, rose from her seat, wineglass in hand, her silk dress the same cold shade of silver as the moonlight pooling across the floor. I smiled reflexively. I wanted this moment to be perfect. I needed it to be. "My darling girl," Karen began, her voice syrupy sweet, "has always been persistent." The room tittered with polite laughter. I smiled, feeling the heat creep up my neck. "Bless her heart," Karen continued. "She's never been the easy one, always needing a little extra attention, a little extra patience." Another ripple of awkward chuckles. Jason sipped his drink. No expression. I felt my fingers tighten around the stem of my glass. Karen leaned closer to the microphone, voice dropping into something that felt conspiratorial, almost intimate. "And really," she said, her smile, wide and sharp as glass, "we all know how lucky she is to have found someone who could handle her." The laughter faltered. A few murmurs. Shifting in chairs. The weight of 1,000 gazes pressed down on me, heavy and hot. Jason chuckled lowly, the sound foreign to me, like a stranger's voice wearing his face. My skin prickled, beneath layers of lace and satin. Karen raised her glass higher. "To Jason, the brave man who took on our sweet, stubborn girl. May he always have the strength to survive it." I heard it then. The undertone no one could ignore anymore. Not a joke. Not love. A knife, slipping between my ribs under the guise of a smile. Applause scattered uncertainly across the room. A few people laughed too loudly, as if willing the moment to feel lighter than it was. I sat frozen. I didn't know how to react. Smile? Cry? Walk out? My mother, my real mother, had once warned me that silence is sometimes the loudest betrayal. I finally understood. Karen sat down, smoothing her dress like nothing had happened. I turned to Jason. I needed to see anger. There. Outrage. A hand reaching for mine under the table. A whispered, "I'm sorry." Instead, I saw something colder. Acceptance. Recognition. Like they had rehearsed this moment together. My chest tightened, breath shallow under the weight of my bodice. Jason stood up. "Thank you, Karen," he said smoothly, taking the microphone with a practiced hand. "I think it's only fair that I say a few words, too." He didn't look at me, not once. He cleared his throat, smiling at the crowd. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. A strange sense of vertigo washed over me, like the floor had shifted, tilting me toward a cliff I hadn't seen coming. And in that suspended heartbeat between his breath and his words, I knew the night wasn't done unraveling. Not yet. Looking back, the story didn't start at the wedding. It started years earlier, before I even knew Jason's name. It started in a house where love was rationed like rain in a drought. My father was a man of few words and fewer hugs. After my mother's death, he remarried quickly to Karen. She was beautiful in the way glass sculptures are beautiful. Cold, precise, easy to shatter if you dared touch. Karen never yelled. She didn't need to. Approval was her currency. A slight nod of praise if I wore what she laid out for me, a small smile if I stayed quiet during dinner parties. Love, in our house, was a transaction. Behave, achieve, obey, and you might get a taste of affection. Might. I learned early that mistakes weren't forgiven. They were stored, cataloged, whispered about later with a sigh and a knowing glance. By the time I was 17, I had perfected the art of vanishing in plain sight. I carried those lessons like invisible stones in my pockets when I left for college. And when I met Jason, I was so desperately tired of carrying them alone. He noticed me in a way no one had before. Or maybe he noticed the cracks I was trying so hard to plaster over. "You're different," he said on our first date, twirling a strand of my hair between his fingers. "Not like other girls. You're soft. You know how to listen." Soft. It sounded like a compliment at the time. Jason was 5 years older, confident in ways that made me feel small but special. He liked that I didn't argue, that I deferred, that I asked for permission without even realizing it. It felt like safety, but it was just another cage. This time, one I locked from the inside. When he asked me to move closer to him, just as I was about to start my graduate program across the country, I didn't hesitate. Scholarships could be deferred, I told myself. Friends who raised eyebrows could be ignored. Love meant sacrifice. Hadn't Karen taught me that? Jason didn't like my best friend Lila. "She's a bad influence," he said. I stopped returning her calls. He didn't like the way I dressed sometimes. "You don't need to show off," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I gave away the red dress Lila had helped me pick. He didn't like when I cried over small things. "You're too sensitive," he would murmur into my hair, as if it were a secret flaw only he had discovered and loved me despite. Each time, I folded a little smaller to fit into the shape he wanted. Karen loved him immediately. Of course she did. The first time I brought Jason home for Thanksgiving, Karen's smile was real, not the tight, strained kind she usually reserved for me. "Finally," she said, patting his hand as he passed her the wine. "Someone who knows how to manage our girl." Manage. Like, I was an unruly project, a garden that needed constant pruning. I laughed it off. What else could I do? No one had ever looked at me the way Jason did, with possession mistaken for love, control mistaken for care. I remember standing in front of the mirror that night, smoothing my dress, Jason's jacket draped over the chair behind me. I caught my own reflection and for just a second didn't recognize the girl staring back. But I pushed the thought away. I was being sensitive. Again. If you grow up starving, even crumbs taste like a feast. And I was so hungry to be loved. The night unraveled in silk and silence. After the last glass was emptied and the final guests spilled into taxis, the ballroom was left strewn with memories. Wilting flowers, half-melted candles, forgotten shoes kicked off in laughter. I slipped out of my dress with fingers trembling from exhaustion, the tiny buttons slipping like beads between my clumsy hands. The room smelled of champagne and roses, a sweetness that now seemed sickly and cloying. Jason was in the shower, humming under the pounding spray, a tune I didn't recognize. A tune I didn't want to recognize. I moved around the room mechanically, gathering the pieces of the day like shattered porcelain. It was when I bent down to pick up his discarded jacket that I noticed it. A small, dark velvet box tucked into the side pocket of his overnight bag. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart slowing into a heavy, uncertain thud. It wasn't wrapped. It wasn't hidden well. Almost carelessly placed. I told myself it was nothing. A surprise, maybe. Something sweet he forgot to give me earlier. But even as I told myself that, my hands moved. Slow, unwilling, inevitable, to open it. Inside, nestled against black velvet, was a ring. Not the delicate band of tiny diamonds he had slipped onto my finger just a few months ago. This ring was different. Older. Worn at the edges. Its gold was dull, the single diamond slightly clouded. My mouth tasted of iron. My fingers trembled as I lifted it, the weight of it wrong, all wrong, against my palm. Beneath the ring was a folded piece of paper, creased and soft from being handled too often. Unfolded it, each crackle of paper sounding impossibly loud in the hushed room. A letter, written in Jason's unmistakable slanted handwriting. "Emily," it began. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the letter fluttering like a wounded bird in my hands. "I'm sorry for everything. For not fighting harder. You were always the real thing. I thought we would have forever. Maybe someday you'll... Forgive me. Maybe someday we can start over. Keep this ring in case that day comes. I'll wait as long as it takes." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. The words etched themselves into my bones, each sentence a scalpel slicing deeper. Emily. Another woman. Another life. Another forever that I had never been meant to be part of. I sat frozen. The cheap hotel lamp buzzing faintly overhead, the carpet rough against my bare feet. The memories came rushing back then, fast and brutal. The rushed proposal after only 6 months. His distracted glances at his phone during dinners. Karen's 2 bright smiles, brittle with something I hadn't wanted to name. Had they all known? Had I been the consolation prize they dressed up in white and paraded down the aisle? The walls of the room seemed to close in, pressing against my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. In the bathroom, the shower shut off. I heard Jason moving, whistling that same unfamiliar tune. I shoved the ring and letter back into the box and stuffed it deep into my suitcase, burying it beneath layers of tulle and lace. I needed time, space, air. I slipped into a pair of jeans and an old college sweatshirt, clothes that still smelled faintly of another life, another girl I had abandoned somewhere along the way. When Jason emerged, toweling his hair dry, he barely glanced at me. "Hey," he said casually, tossing the towel over a chair. "You okay?" I opened my mouth, closed it. What could I say? That I found the proof I was never the one? That I was the runner-up in a race I hadn't even known I was running? "I'm just tired," I said instead, my voice thin and brittle as cracked porcelain. He kissed the top of my head, a careless, distracted press of lips. "Get some sleep, babe. Big day tomorrow." Big day. The first day of the rest of a life I no longer wanted. He climbed into bed, turning off the light without another word. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep, feeling the letter burn against the soles of my feet from where it lay hidden. Outside the window, the city pulsed and flickered, alive, unbothered, unknowing. And somewhere deep inside, something small and sharp began to stir. Not just anger, not just grief. Something older, something wilder. The first crack in the glass, the first breath of rebellion. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I knew this. I would not be the girl who stayed. I left before dawn. No note. No goodbye. Just a crumpled wedding dress abandoned in a corner, still faintly perfumed with gardenias and regret. The city was still half asleep, the sky bleeding from black to gray as the rain came. Soft at first, then heavier, until it blurred. the world into watercolor smears. I tossed the duffel bag into the back seat of the first cab that would stop for me. The driver didn't ask questions. He just turned up the heater and played an old jazz station crackling through tired speakers. I watched the city shrink behind the raindrops racing down the window, all those glittering towers and shining promises, vanishing into the mist. Jason would wake to an empty bed. Karen would frown into her untouched coffee. The fairy tale would end without fanfare, without explosion. Just absence. Just silence. I didn't have a plan. Only a direction. Away. Hours later, I stumbled into a town so small it barely had a name. A half-moon of sagging rooftops and battered storefronts pressed up against the gray arms of the sea. It was the smell that convinced me to stay. Salt, rain, old wood. It smelled like endings, like beginnings. I found a room for rent above a bookstore. No one seemed to shop in anymore. The owner was an elderly woman with lavender hair and arthritic hands, who barely looked up from her crossword puzzle as she handed me the key. The room was tiny, a mattress on the floor, a cracked mirror, a window that overlooked the restless ocean. It was perfect. I spent the first week sleeping too much or not at all, waking up with dreams stitched into my throat, dreams where Jason's voice called after me, where Karen's laugh echoed down endless hallways. Some mornings I cried until my chest ached. Other mornings I sat by the window, watching the rain thread silver needles into the waves. There was a kettle on the windowsill. A chipped mug, small mercies. I made tea. I folded laundry. I read battered novels with missing pages and underlined sentences from strangers long gone. I learned the creak of the bookstore stairs, the sigh of the floorboards beneath my bare feet, the way the sky bruised purple just before a storm. No one knew me here. No one expected anything from me. I wasn't the bride here. I wasn't the disappointment here. I wasn't anyone's anything. Just me. Some days, that felt like freedom. Other days, it felt like being untethered in deep water, too small to fight the tide. But even broken things can float. The bookstore owner, her name was Miriam, started leaving little things outside my door: of fresh pastry wrapped in wax paper, a scarf she claimed she knitted decades ago, a note in careful cursive. "You're doing better than you think." I wanted to believe her. I started helping out downstairs, sweeping dusty aisles, restocking shelves with trembling hands, listening to the soft murmur of Miriam's radio playing old love songs in the background. Each day was a thread, small, fragile, but enough to start weaving a life out of the wreckage. I bought a new journal at the corner store. Its cover was battered, its pages yellowed at the edges. It reminded me of myself. On the first page I wrote, "I am not what they made of me. I am what I choose to build from what's left." The words looked small and lonely on the page, but they were mine. The wedding ring Jason had slipped onto my finger still sat heavy in the bottom of my duffel bag. I thought about throwing it into the sea, letting the tide take it back to whatever broken place it belonged. But I wasn't ready yet. Not yet. Grief doesn't burn itself out all at once. It smolders. It drips through your ribs like candle wax. It teaches you how to live with fire inside your chest. One night, weeks later, I stood barefoot on the beach, the cold biting into my skin, salt air stinging my eyes. The ring dangled from my fingers. A small, traitorous star catching the moonlight. I didn't throw it. I didn't cry. I just stood there, the waves licking at my toes, and made a promise. I would not let this be the end of me. Not for Jason. Not for Karen. Not for anyone. 6 months later, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror. The girl who had once tiptoed through life, desperate for approval, was gone. burned away by betrayal and rebuilt by her own hands. Managed the bookstore now. Miriam had officially retired and handed me the keys with a smile that wrinkled her whole face. "You belong here more than I ever did," she said, pressing the brass key into my palm. For the first time in my life, I believed someone when they said I belonged. The days passed quietly, but with purpose, stocking shelves, ordering new books, watching regulars drift in and out, faces I began to know by heart, children who grew from picture books to chapter books under my watchful eye. At night, I filled notebooks with words, not about Jason or Karen, but about myself, about the girl who had survived, about the woman still becoming. Therapy helped. Hard truths spilled across tissue-strewn offices. You weren't crazy. You were conditioned. You were loved for what you gave, not who you were. I learned about narcissists, about trauma bonds, about how easy it is to mistake manipulation for affection when you are raised starving for love. Each session stitched a new piece of myself back together, not into the girl they wanted, but into something stronger, sharper. One evening, while reorganizing the poetry section, I saw a familiar name flash across my phone. Lila. The friend Jason had driven away, telling me she was toxic, jealous, bad for us. I stared at her message for a long time before answering. Then I picked up the phone and dialed. Hearing her voice was like slipping into an old, beloved sweater. Comforting, familiar, a little tight in places, but still mine. "I'm sorry," I blurted. Out before she could even say hello, she laughed. Warm, easy. "Don't be," she said. "I'm just glad you're back." Over coffee, Lila caught me up on her life. A new job, a new apartment, the same sharp wit that had once made Jason squirm. When I told her about Jason, the letter, the other woman, the night I vanished, she didn't say "I told you so." She just took my hand across the chipped cafe table and said, "You don't owe anyone your suffering. Not anymore." It was Lila who introduced me to her lawyer friend, a woman with steel in her spine and kindness in her eyes. We worked quietly, carefully. I gathered everything: bank statements, credit reports, emails I had ignored, debts I hadn't understood, but now could see clearly. Jason had opened accounts in my name, racked up charges while promising he would take care of everything. Karen had co-signed some of it, whispering reassurances I was foolish enough to believe. I built my case piece by piece, like a slow, steady fire, until it was ready to burn. The charity gala was Karen's crowning event, an annual spectacle. She co-chaired to polish her image among the city's elite. Jason would be there too, of course. Perfect suits, perfect smiles, perfect lies. I planned my entrance carefully, no longer invisible, no longer small. On the night of the gala, I wore a red dress, scarlet, soft as liquid fire against my skin. The kind of dress Jason once told me was too much. The kind of dress Karen would whisper was attention-seeking. Good. Let them choke on it. The cab ride to the venue was quiet. I watched the city lights smear against the glass, my heart steady for the first time in a long time. At the steps of the gleaming hotel, I paused, lifted my chin, breathed in the humid, spring air, thick with honeysuckle and ambition. Inside, the gala glittered. Chandeliers dripping crystals, champagne glasses sparkling like captured stars, silk gowns swirling across the marble floor. I spotted them immediately. Karen holding court near the silent auction tables. Jason by the bar, laughing too loudly. Their armor gleamed under the soft lights. Perfect. Untouchable. But they didn't see the cracks. They never did. I walked across the ballroom, heels clicking like a drumbeat of war, heads turned. Whispers followed. Good. Let them look. I approached Jason first. His back was to me, but some instinct made him turn. The smile froze on his lips. His eyes darted to my dress, my face, the envelope in my hand. Recognition, fear, panic. He opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. "Hi, Jason," I said, voice calm, smooth. "Remember me?" I handed him the envelope, thick with evidence, cold with finality. His fingers trembled as he took it. I didn't wait for him to speak. Didn't give him the chance to spin, to lie, to twist. I turned to Karen, who was watching now, wine glass clutched too tightly in one manicured hand. I smiled. "I think you'll want to read that too," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than any scream. I walked away without looking back. The whispers rose behind me, a tide I no longer feared. Outside, the night was cool and bright with stars. I stood on the steps for a moment, the city humming around me, the weight of the ring Jason had given me heavy in my clutch. I walked to the fountain at the edge of the plaza. The water shimmered under the moonlight, waiting. I pulled the ring from my hand, the last relic of a life built on lies, and let it fall. It broke the surface with barely a sound. Gone. I wiped my palms against my dress, lifted my face to the stars. I was done carrying their ghosts. I was done being their good girl. Tonight, I was my own, scarlet and shining and free. The second time I walked into that ballroom, it wasn't as a guest. It wasn't as someone clinging to a life someone else had scripted. I walked in carrying my own name, my own future, and the weight of truth tucked neatly into a leather portfolio at my side. My lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could slice marble, walked beside me, her heels tapping a steady rhythm against the marble floor. The gala pulsed with glitter and music, chandeliers casting 1,000 fractured stars across the walls. The same polished crowd, the same perfect smiles. But something had changed. I didn't hide behind careful makeup and a demure dress. Tonight, I wore midnight blue, sleek, strong, undeniable. I caught Jason's eye across the room almost immediately. The way his expression faltered was almost comical. Karen, standing stiffly beside him, followed his gaze and stilled like a deer sighting a hunter. Their faces, painted in polite disinterest, cracked at the edges. Good. The announcements buzzed through the speakers, a toast to the donors, a blessing for the future. Empty, hollow words meant to float over the crowd like perfume. I waited until the clink of glasses filled the air and all eyes turned toward the front stage. Then I stepped forward. My voice, steady, clear, cut through the noise. "Before we continue," I said, "there's something everyone here deserves to know." A hush fell like a heavy curtain. The gala host blinked in confusion. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Jason started moving toward me, panic written across his face, but my lawyer blocked his path with a single sharp look. I opened the portfolio and pulled out the papers, copies of bank statements, emails, letters, proof, receipts. "My name is on fraudulent accounts I never opened," I said. "My credit was destroyed without my knowledge. Lies were told, promises made and broken." I didn't name Jason directly. I didn't have to. The documents spoke louder than any accusation. I laid them neatly on the podium, one after another. Karen's face turned a peculiar shade of gray. Jason's hands shook as he tried to speak, but no words came. The crowd watched in stunned, horrified silence. The whispers started, low at first, then rising like a gathering storm. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I let the truth sit there, heavy and undeniable. Then, quietly, methodically, my lawyer informed them of the charges being filed: fraud, identity theft, emotional damages, everything done legally, properly, surgically, There would be no screaming match tonight, no dramatic table flipping, only a precise dismantling of the lies they had built around themselves. A polite apocalypse. I gathered my papers back into the portfolio. Jason took a step forward, reaching for me, his face crumpling into something pathetic and small. But I was already moving past him, past Karen's frozen stare, past the brittle smiles of old family friends who now looked anywhere but at me. Outside, the night was cool and clear. I walked to the fountain in the courtyard, the same one that had swallowed my wedding ring months before. I slipped the necklace Jason had once given me from around my neck, a delicate gold chain with a single hollow heart. How fitting. Let it dangle from my fingertips for a moment, feeling its tiny weight. Then I let it fall. It hit the water with a sound too soft to match the weight it had carried all this time. The ripples devoured it whole. I stood there for a while, watching the surface smooth itself back into perfect stillness. No evidence. No memory. Just water and light and silence. Behind me, the gala doors opened. Music and laughter spilled into the courtyard, desperate and strained. But I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see their faces one last time. I didn't need to hear their excuses or their apologies, if they even came. Some endings don't need words. Some endings are quieter than a sigh. Slipped my hands into the pockets of my dress, something Jason would have hated, and walked down the steps, heels clicking steadily against the stones. I didn't flinch. I didn't falter. The city opened its arms to me, wide and glittering and full of possibility. I was no longer anyone's good girl, no longer the understudy in someone else's tragedy. Was the writer of my own story now, the woman who left the stage on her own terms. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. The future stretched before me, wild and unwritten. A book with blank pages waiting for me to choose the words, and this time, I was going to choose every single one.